All right, everyone, welcome back to the Mission 300 podcast. Today, we're going to talk about violence. And before we record these episodes, we usually spend a little bit of time talking about our topic, bouncing some ideas back and forth. We've been at this for like 2 hours now, so we flushed every idea out perfectly. Everything we say here is going to perfectly align with each other, and we're definitely not going to be wrestling with different things. But honestly, what we're going to try to get at here is there a proper role for violence in a Christian context? If so, what are some parameters? What are some situations and contexts where it's acceptable or even commanded scripturally? Any situations where we are prohibited from being violent or where we should maybe pump the brakes and think about what's going on? So a couple of questions we want to get to are, what am I allowed to do as a Christian man? And even deeper than that, did Jesus come to bring peace or a sword? So we're going to jump into it. We're hopefully going to get into some character traits of God that we see in the Old and New Testament, some practical application for each of us as individuals. And we do want to try to get specific to us as individuals. What do we do today in the situations we are in? We don't want to spend all this time generalizing abstract situations or analyzing plans of governments and actions of organizations to see if they did something right and wrong. We want to look at ourselves and know what we should or should not do. So, guys, let's get into it.
Well, we had a very spirited conversation early on, which we got lost in the weeds, to be honest with you. So we're not going to take you all through that marshy land. Well, maybe. We do have a dilemma of definitions about how a Christian should be, how a man that's a Christian should be. We've gone through, probably this last generation has been so much of an emasculation of men and softening of them, that if we do anything that seems forceful or strong or to carry any kind of strength of influence, it's almost like we're there's something wrong. There's something wrong with us. There's something wrong that's happening. And so it's almost like a switch is happening that men are starting to see. We need to be strong. We need to fight for our communities. We need to stand firm. And we've seen from a political sphere of what happens when strong men just bow out. Truth doesn't stand. Righteousness doesn't stand. And usually it's when men become weak that all this stuff starts blossoming. And we've talked about this in podcasts before of when you have good times, it develops weak men, and weak men create hard times, and hard times create strong men, and strong men, this process of how our environment is. And the question was arising is, when do men stand up and rise? When do we fight? When do we turn to the other cheek? What's our role in this? And we probably won't answer that question, but we will probably provoke more questions by the time we're done, I have a feeling. But I do want to bring this context, and I think it all stands from the nature of God, and I think we'll get into that. But if we don't know the nature of God, we won't understand what our response is to be, because we're made in His image. We're made in His likeness, and then as a new birth, as new creation, we're in the image of God. We stand with Him. God, according to Hebrews, is the same yesterday, today, and forever. That means the God of the Old Testament is still the God of the New Testament and is the God of our future. There is this perspective that the God of the Old Testament is different than the God of the New Testament. In the God of the New Testament, our world is shaped. Jesus as this passive, numbly, meek little man, and I'm not even going to use the word meek because that's misused, weak man, that just does everything by love and has his little love beads and almost this hippie type Christianity, no offense hippies, this hippie type Christianity where everything is about quote unquote love. And the problem is there is no love if there's not another side of wrath. There's no love without another side of wrath. Now, it doesn't mean we're getting the wrath, but it means there's a protection of it. There's a fight for it. It's almost like if you say you love your wife or you love somebody, and then when something happens to them, you're just like, oh, I don't want to get involved because it's all about love. No, you don't love that person. What you do is you actually love yourself. So I think our version of Christianity of loving others really is more about loving ourselves so others don't look down on us or look at us as bad. It's self-love. And that is not our Christianity, nor is it the nature of God. God has always been selfless. For God so loved the world that he gave. So with that, if we can kind of go into those topic lines, we can discover what's our response as a man in our world.
So here are some thoughts I jotted down when it relates to the character of God that we see Old and New Testament. Some of these references are from the Old, though. Exodus 15, we see the Song of Moses. And one thing that's always struck me about this is it's kind of violent at times, because in the Song of Moses, it says, horse and its rider God has hurled into the sea. Not just the horse and his rider God hurled into the sea. It goes on to say, God is a warrior. Yahweh is his name. There's this picture of strength of God defending his people when they are attacked or oppressed by something. In Nehemiah, we see enemies surrounding the people as they're trying to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem, to the point where Nehemiah says, all right, while we work, carry a sword in your hand and the shovel in the other. And they establish guards and take shifts that are armed to defend the city and their people from the enemies that are attacking. In Judges, we see this constantly. We see people that, at large, the people do evil, and God sends a deliverer because the people at large have abandoned God. He sends someone to physically deliver them from their enemies. We see this with Gideon becoming, not becoming really, we see Gideon as a mighty man of valor, leading the people to militarily free themselves. We see even assassinations, like with Ehud, going solo and assassinating the king that was oppressing them. Now, I don't want to take that too far, and maybe we'll get some context to that in a little bit, but we see heroic things like Samson, who is almost by himself delivering the people and throwing off their oppressors. So there are some context, at least, to the character of God, being that when his people are oppressed, he sends someone to deliver them. Now, there's 100 things I'm not saying with all those statements, but I do think it's important that we see that character trait.
So maybe we could tie in the character trait of Jesus entering the scene. So in Acts, he says that I came to destroy the works of the devil. Paul talks about the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, which is true, but they're mighty through God to the pulling down of strongholds. A war was declared. We see a spiritual war taking place where Satan is cast down and goes to war against the saints. We live in a war zone. We have a war of ideologies. We have a war of these events. We see Jesus coming on a white horse to bring judgment and war against the nations. In the book of Revelation, at the end of the New Testament, we see the warrior coming back out. So we see the warrior before, we see the warrior at the end, and we're in a warfare. But what's the warfare for? The love of humanity. The war is over humanity, right? So God is not looking for anyone to be lost. And we can see this actually in the Old Testament too, and we can digress onto those. But I think we need to see his nature hasn't changed, but maybe we're seeing a better glimpse of what he was actually fighting for throughout the Old to the New through the New Testament.
I think maybe the question going through my head when Jason is giving those examples and Brian, you're talking about how we see it through history. I think the question, like a lot of young men, or I'll just speak for myself, that I have is, when is it the responsibility of the individual Christian man to act in that way? Like, is there a place for that in quote unquote modern society where Ehud takes the blade and plunges it into his stomach? Because we see that in the Old Testament. We don't necessarily see Jesus do that. Like, you can correct me if I'm wrong. I think the most violent example we see of Jesus would be him going and flipping the tables. And so I guess that would kind of be my question, is like, is there even is there even a place for more violence than quote unquote flipping tables? Is there a place for violence that is against an individual? And that, I think that's a big question, because you see there is a lot of evil in the world today, and you go, well, what would be justified action against that person in the most extreme example? Or, like, when does that start and end? I think that's a lot of the questions that are coming up when you read Old Testament stories versus the New Testament.
And maybe we can do some more specific examples, because that's kind of important. We talked about this before, that when we bring this up, everyone has 12 different scenarios in their mind, and we're sometimes trying to cross-reference them, and we have miscommunications, or we disagree with each other because I'm thinking of this context and you're thinking of this context, and the two are completely separate things. So one thing I'll say, just on the character side, you mentioned Jesus flipping tables. It also says that he left and made a whip. So he took time to think about this physically violent act that he was going to inflict on these people. We also see Jesus saying, I didn't come to bring peace, but I came to bring a sword. And one of my favorite references is when they're arresting him, he says, don't you know I could call down legions from my Father right now? But I'm not doing that because I'm here to go through this. And so we see at least a character trait of this demonstration of, I have all the power. I could burn you alive right now if I wanted to. I'm not doing that because I'm here for a purpose. And so there's not an absence of power, but there is a context for his actions or lack of action at times. And I think we do need to keep that in mind, because on one hand, we shouldn't just go around guns blazing and trying to fist fight everyone we disagree with. But at the same time, there is a time for action and a time for physical force to be used.
I think that the other question that has to be pulled out, that was, as I'm pondering it, is when is the time that we stand up and do what's right because it's right? And when is the time that we kind of look to passivity, that we become passive, where we're uncourageous? And I think one of the characteristics that I think is important for us to maybe establish is when we truly walk in selfless love, you're not doing things on behalf of you. Most of our world, the anger that stirs is because we kind of press on someone else's space. Like, I'm offending you because I said that, and it creates this war. If I don't agree with you in your thought, you're angry at me. Like, those are selfish, driven ideologies. And if you go study and go, just take a moment, go on YouTube and go look at all the Medal of Honor recipients. Amazing heroic events. You can just sit and listen to like 10-minute episodes. There's a whole channel for it that was set up by the Department of Defense, or whoever does the committee for the Medal of Honor. And every single one of them, almost without fail, I didn't hear anything different. I was not angry or hating of the enemy. I love my brother that was next to me. All of the actions was done out of brotherly love, that violence had to take place. The person who receiving the award actually didn't even consider himself. He said they would have all done the same thing and praised them. So when we're looking at this, when we step into actually God's kind of love, there is an action, and there is a time there's a physical force, but you're not considering yourself. Until we get that out of the way, it's hard to really come with a moral discretion. When do I act and when do I don't act?
I think, like, an example for myself that has directed a lot of like what I do in life was in middle school. There was a teacher, and there was a political issue at the time. I don't even need to specify what it was, but he got up in front of the class, and it was a Bible class too, and said, hey, we've talked about this political issue in another class. We've come to the conclusion it's this. And there was another student who had been in that other class and agreed with him. And in the moment, I was like, well, I don't agree with that. And I know I have a responsibility to the other people in this class for them to not hear this one quote unquote truth, even though I didn't believe it's true. So I felt the need to speak up, because if somebody didn't, that would be concluded as the truth for the entire class. And so I think that's where I'm wondering about, like, there's 100 different issues you could apply that to today, and we could give specific examples, and there could be a ton of nuance to it. But I think that's where I'm wondering, like, okay, what issue do I need to go pick to go speak up about today? Because there's 1,000 different ones. Or go do something about, like, speaking is one version of doing, and you could do something differently besides just speaking. But I question myself every day because I knew in that moment it was a small instance where I had responsibility to say and do something because it was literally right in front of me. And now with things like having a bigger worldview, there are things that I see as technically my responsibility as an individual that other people are being affected by, that I can't go do all of them. I don't know if this is making sense, but it's like the question of, there's a lot of dark political things going on in the world. There's a lot of people questioning, why doesn't anybody go do anything about this? And I'm questioning that, but questioning that for myself. And so I think there's also kind of this wondering of, we know there is the example of Jesus flipping the tables in the temple. Like, we can follow that example, but how do you actually apply it in a real world application without, like, Jesus was perfect when he did it. I am not at all. Very far from it. So how do you even go into something like that? And that could be too abstract, I guess. So it could be going a different direction. But I don't know if the line of thought there makes sense of me questioning what I need to go do.
Caleb, I have a similar fear or concern, let's say, of like the quote is, if you stand for nothing, you'll fall for anything. And I think that's the exact challenge that I'm faced with myself too, of like, there's so many things that the world, and I'll say that it's the world, it's not necessarily God, that we should be caring about, that we should be advocating for, that we should be standing up against. But then what does it actually look like to stand up against that? Because I think of the examples like Jesus in the temple, like flipping the tables. To me, that doesn't seem like a targeted attack on a single person, but rather a group or a belief that came from that time, right? And it necessitated action, strong action, right? And I think exactly what you're saying, Caleb, is like, at what point in all of these events does it necessitate strong action from myself to go do something? Or am I being apathetic? Because that's the other trap I fall into too, is like, I mean, we can be blunt, there's terrible things going on in the world, but do I really care? Because I have no effect. It's like, at what point do I make a stand to fight for something, and at what point do I just, it's really out of my control?
It's interesting in Jesus' case, he says the zeal for my Father's house consumed me. If you notice, it was outside of him. Like, it wasn't his own violation. Like, when they violated him personally, turn the other cheek, you want me to go 1 mile, I'll go 2. He was always in a position of power. We may need to address this thought of, if we were prepared selflessly to take action in life, we may understand better when to take action. I'll give you an example. So went to the police academy, was preparing for that, was doing security for a couple pretty rough area. One was a nightclub and one was in this project area, and always an altercation or something going on at night at this store that I was working at. And yeah, I was a rent-a-cop, so call it what it is. But nevertheless, I'm a young guy, right? I'm 20 years old, in the police academy, trying to get my feet wet, trying to learn how to deal with people. And I knew I wasn't prepared. So there's a lot of training I had to do. We had to go through all the police training. We had to do baton classes, how to do takedowns. By the way, the kneel on the neck was part of your normal takedown from the police academy in Minneapolis that I was trained at. Just FYI, for any of you wondering where that came from. So I had to learn all these things to handle myself. But then I also I was taking Taekwondo. I realized I'd never been in a fight before, per se, except when I was a kid and got punched in the nose and realized I didn't enjoy that process. So I kind of had to learn how to go do all this. So I was in a Taekwondo class, and my instructor also trained a couple other police departments with takedown tactics, baton, different things. So I spent 2.5 years doing that while I was in the police academy and my education and doing all that process. All this to say is the more I learned how to actually care for myself and to take care of myself and the power I could exude and what to do in harmful situations, the funny thing was the less conflicts that I came across. I knew how to handle myself in those matters. I knew how to speak in those matters. I knew how to diffuse the matters because I was confident I could take on a physical matter if I needed to, which I did at one point, and how to deal with that. I knew there was one time where this kid came in and he started beating up this girl in the parking lot. So I went out there and intervened. Well, then he got his buddies and he came back after me because I intervened, right? So he comes in, and because of the training, he came running at me. And I remember all this kind of in slow motion. It was my first real conflicting event that I was attacked in. And he took a swing, I ducked, I grabbed him, threw him on a car, and I put his arm behind his back. And his friend started coming behind me. And I whispered in this guy's ear, I said, if your friend comes near me, I'm going to take out your shoulder. And I just started cranking back. So you should tell your friend to back off. And immediately he's telling his friend, back up. But, he's like, because I was serious, because I'm not going to deal with both of you at the same time. So I leveraged my power physically, and his friend immediately backed up and said, now he needs to leave the property. So his friend walked off. I said, now I'm going to let you go. And if you come back on here, you will be arrested for trespassing. Here's what's going to happen to you. Do you understand? Yeah. So I let him go. And of course, he got a little mouthy as he got farther and farther away. Him and his friend never came back to that place again. So there was a physical thing that was done. But what was the bigger thing? I wanted peace for everyone to come and shop in that store without dealing with these guys coming in and messing. But if I just got physical and I pulled out a baton and started whacking on people, the whole neighborhood would have come after me and I would have been the target. Instead, the neighborhood liked me because I actually wasn't trying to go after anybody. I was trying to bring peace to the situation. And that marked me for a long time. And I realized me being I was the absolute minority in that whole neighborhood, 100%. And I loved working in that neighborhood. And I got to know the people. I got to know the shop owners. I got to know people coming in because I wasn't there to prove me. I was there to make life better for them. And once they got that, things began to shift. And I think there's something to be said in everything. But I needed to take physical action, and I needed to know how to do physical action and when to act, when to back off, and when to push myself.
So I guess where I would play, I don't know, not devil's advocate, but have like another question would be like, okay, Brian, that's awesome. That was a self-defense situation. So that's very clear. And you were defending yourself, defending the property there. But I think a lot of issues today that people are asking, should action be taken on this? It's not actively violating them in the moment. Like nobody is currently in my life at all violating me besides the person who cuts me off in traffic, and I just don't care that much. So what about the stuff where it's not directly violating you, but there's still some sense of responsibility would be my question.
Well, in the story, what caused that kid to bring his friend back to come and put me into a self-defense position? I defended the girl getting beat up in the parking lot. I stepped into another world, which caused the attack on me. If I would have just let that happen and let it go, nothing. They would never have bothered me. So I did step in because these kids were causing problems with the other patrons at the store. So it wasn't just the property, it was the protection of the people and the protection of an individual that caused this to come about. So you have to be willing to deal with the repercussions of a right action. So I was dealing with the repercussions of a right action. I was responsible for it. And I think that's one of the biggest things is when you know what you're capable of, you have to also be willing to accept the responsibility. So many people want to act and do something, but they don't want any repercussion on them.
I think that is a real big thing that people need to consider because, like we'd mentioned before, at times we feel the desire to do something because we assume it's going to be accompanied by accolades from the people that witness it. And maybe a good question to ask is, would I do this thing if literally everyone disapproved of it? Would it still be the right thing to do? And am I willing to accept the consequences for that? Now, I know in a lot of cases, the answer for people is absolutely, let's go. I don't know if I'm permitted or allowed to do this. But that is something we need to ask ourselves. Am I willing to deal with the consequences of this?
My question of because we have to get a further distance from ourselves as far as like the example, because that was something that was very direct to you, Brian. I would still maybe argue like that it was happening outside. You went and did it. So what if there was a case where at the other side of town, there's a domestic abuse situation, and to stop it, you would go, this is wrong what's happening. This husband is beating his wife. I should break into their home while he's actively doing it and physically stop him. And that would require some form of physical violence. And then let's say too, that the wife turns and go, if she's in a situation where she's still like in domestic abuse situation, still loves him, and then calls the cops on you and you get arrested for breaking and entering, right? Like that's like kind of a hypothetical that maybe could be applied to certain things where you knew it was still right to stop it and you had these consequences from it. It's on the other side of the town from you. It's not even your own neighbor. I think there's like questions like that where it's like, how far can you go away from you to go do what's right, if that makes sense in the direction that I'm wondering.
This is such a great example. Police department training. Number one most dangerous scenario to be in is a cop going into a domestic situation to rescue one of the people. Almost inevitably, the other party will turn. So you have to bring two to watch the other party. And the reason that is there's so much emotion involved. My personal feeling is you want to deal with stuff like that, become a police officer. Train yourself to go deal with stuff like that. Because when they turn on you and you become the villain in the story, you accomplish nothing. And the individual, they need outside help that's where you could go work and start an organization for domestic abuse. There's so many great programs where women could speak to other women to kind of help train them to get out of those environments. That absolutely, there's ways to go deal with this because you're not dealing with the violence by itself. You're dealing with ideologies, ways of thinking, so many societal factors that are going into this scenario that individual doesn't even look at it as a rescue, but an invasion. You're not even helping the thinking of that. Now we could say, well, I'm saving you and from yourself, but you've had to input in improperly, so there's no support. So I'd venture to say there's other ways to go about dealing with this. But why are you the one being pulled into it? Something that's a distance away that they don't even want you involved in.
In that example, you wouldn't act out on that because it's out of your control, or like I'm trying to get the moral justification behind this of like, yeah, you're not the arbiter of what's true and what's just, I guess, in that realm, but wouldn't you be standing up for someone who needs to be rescued in a sense?
Well, there's a lot of context I need to know who the people are. Why am I connected to them? Why am I being involved in it? Why am I inserting myself into it? What other means have I gone? Did I call the police about it? Or am I just taking matters into my own hands? Did I notify what's taking place? Have I observed it? Or am I just hearing about it? Am I a witness to it? These all play in. And I think sometimes we have so much lack of wisdom that we make it so personal that we lack wisdom and we jump, and then we could find out we're wrong. But we don't deal with it from that perspective. So
I think
I think that's why I come across from that perspective.
So you guys let me know if you don't think this context applies, but in Exodus, we see the story of Moses the first time he attempts to free his people, when he's out and he sees an Egyptian mistreating one of his fellow countrymen, and he kills the Egyptian and saves his fellow countrymen. So he goes out of his way to do that. And then the next day, some of his other countrymen say, "Who are you to judge over us? Who appointed you to be our leader? Are you going to kill me like you killed the Egyptian?" And because they rejected Moses, and we see this in Acts, that what Moses was doing there was trying to free them from their oppression and their slavery, but they didn't get it and didn't accept it. And so because they rejected him, he left 40 years. He was, I wouldn't say abandoned, but his attempt to free his people from their literal slavery oppression was thwarted because they rejected him, the deliverer. But he still took the action. They just rejected it.
I think that's really interesting, and this could connect. But Brian might have answered for me the question that we were like really digging into for 2 hours before, when you said something that it wasn't registering before, but it just did now, where you said, I can't even remember what you said, but the word that popped into my head, you said wisdom. And do you think this statement would be correct that morality without wisdom is almost useless, because you have to use wisdom as like the funnel for morality towards action? Because otherwise your morality can go in any direction, kind of like, do the ends justify the means? Because there's an ends, morality is an ends, but the means to the end of that morality could be different. And so I guess I'm wondering, like, even like what you're saying, Jason, with was it a moral thing for Moses to kill that man to defend his fellow countrymen? Well, was it practical? Was it wise to do it? And I guess maybe that's the question I'm wondering. Does the morality have to be accompanied by wisdom? And not as like an excuse, because then you could just go, well, that's more morally correct, but it wouldn't be wise to act that out. So I wouldn't want somebody to use that as like an excuse to not do something. But maybe that's the point you were trying to make, Brian, for the previous 2 hours we were talking. And I could be wrong, but that does make more sense in my head to say that without wisdom, morality, what I dare say, is almost even useless, because what do you do with it? Like, you could have all the morality in the world and do nothing with it. That would not be wise. You could have all the morality in the world and do everything with it to some kind of means. And that's what people like dictators do, because they believe in a utopia or morality of a perfect world, and their means towards that is tens of millions of deaths. And that would be the issue with morality being used without wisdom. Same maybe for Moses, if you want to say he's wrong there. And that may answer some of my questions that I've had. But I don't know if that would be a correct way to interpret it. But since you mentioned morality and wisdom, Brian, that's what came to my mind.
So think about that, is that word, that wisdom is the principal thing. Of all the things to get, wisdom is the principal thing. And, we see that in Solomon, how he conducted matters. He weighed them out. It's like it wasn't personal. He weighed out wisdom for the benefit of what was right. And wisdom also wisdom without compassion is brutal. Not really the biblical wisdom, but I'm just trying how we look at wisdom. If you're super wise and know all things, but you don't have compassion, it's brutal. If you have all compassion with no wisdom, you are just laissez-faire, sloppy, and it's destructive. There's this blend between two, and I know there's a I think it's in Mark chapter 3. Jesus goes and sees the leper, and it says he had compassion on the leper. And that word compassion is a deep empathy, but it's also a violence towards what was causing the leprosy to begin with. In that case, it would be sin, right? Because that's according to the law. And he said, I will, and he touched him. He invaded the space because you weren't allowed to touch someone who had leprosy or you would be considered unclean. And he actually risked himself to be unclean, which would make him not a sacrifice for us if he was unclean. And it says he touched the leper. He didn't just speak to the leper, he touched him, and he was made clean. And it says he had compassion on him. Compassion isn't pity, it's not sympathy. It's it's an empathy, a deep love and empathy that demands action. And so he acted. You don't understand the war words that he created by stepping into that leper's life and touching him. It was an action of compassion. And so when you're asking, when do you get involved? Deep God compassion causes you to get involved because you don't think of yourself. You're so wanting that person to be free or liberated. Now, here's the deal, though. They may not always respond in the case of Moses. In Exodus, he's looked at as a murderer, but when Stephen clarifies the story, he wasn't a murderer. He was actually acting on their deliverance, and they rejected him. And I think his fear of public speaking wasn't to deal with Pharaoh, it was to deal with his own people. We're dealing with so many parts. We're doing justice on something, but the people want the injustice. They don't want the outcome of the injustice, but they don't want the injustice to go away. You know, it's like we have all these moral things even in our country that we fight for, but then we do the immoral things that are building to it, and we don't deal with that. Like it's a very convoluted. So you have to be willing to walk in the fear of the Lord in your actions of when to act, when not to act. And I think you should be prepared to do any kind of action. I think Stephen was one of the most violent actions against the enemy in the history of the New Testament, besides Jesus. Jesus was the most violent towards the enemy, even though it looks like it was happening to him. He willingly accepted that. Stephen willingly accepted the outcome of his own pain and destruction to speak the truth, to liberate. And it ends up becoming the building block of how we get the Apostle Paul doing what he does. So we have to learn what is the best weaponry to deal with the evil. What is the best process? To Stephen, it was to forgive them. To Jesus, it was to forgive them. And you think, well, that's just apathetic. Oh, no. He was willing not only to forgive him, but to put himself into the situation where it killed him. It was very active. So all these actions were acts of war. When you speak against a nation, even when we wrote the act of war against the Revolutionary Army of America against England was the act of writing the Declaration of Independence. That was the act of war. It wasn't the actual fighting. It was the declaration, this is what we're going to be. So I think in all this, we have to, first of all, have the capability to actually act. One, we got to get out of ourselves, that we're not walking in our own self-love, self-protection, but we're also having the wisdom to think about the whole and the love for the whole. And is my actions going to make me feel better, or is it actually going to have a benefit on humanity? So you have to weigh out those things. And then we have to understand the nature of God. The nature of God, God didn't come to bring peace but a sword. God wants peace with us. But he didn't say, I'm going to come so you can have peace with your neighbor. I'm going to come so you can have peace with me, so you know how to have peace with your neighbor. Most people don't even bring God into the picture. They just want it comfortable for them. Well, that isn't really what he came to provide. And he said, I'm going to come and destroy the works of the enemy. Your weapons of your warfare are not carnal, but mighty through God to the pulling down of strongholds. We are in a spiritual war. So why didn't he make the war go away? But because he's equipping us for war. But now we have to have the wisdom to know when to act, when not to act. What entity am I in? Am I in the police department? What do I do? Am I the president of a nation now that has to govern and protect the people, which he was sworn to go do? So he has an oath to go do that. So now you take a preemptive strike and you go to battle with another nation. When we're in that situation, you make those kinds of decisions. So we only can deal with what we're responsible for. And again, that's going to come back to responsibility and our authority. What do you have authority over? What do you have responsibility over?
I think that answers a lot of my questions that I've been having. I think Tommy would agree, and maybe in his conversations with people he knows, my conversation with people I know, because there's a lot of issues that are very deeply troubling and very like, what should I go do about this? And I think like there's some stuff that could be a cop out. Like it feels easy to say, well, there's nothing I can do about it. I'll do the best I can with like my own neighbors and do like what I can do with people I know personally and meet. And I think while that's true, because that is like something you have authority over in a circle, there still is like that lingering thought of there's even bigger issues that are affecting more people. But I guess I just argue with myself constantly because I go back and forth between that and well, if I could just affect one person and change their life, maybe they would affect one other person and change that person's life. And it would maybe change culture instead of try and take care of a big issue and making a big fuss about it, but nobody cares because no individual heart has been changed. And I think to a person who doesn't have like a spiritual Christian perspective, that will not make sense at all. Because I have people and coworkers and friends who are pretty strong atheists or don't believe in God, and they would never get if I told them that. Like they would think it was just a cop out. Like it would just be like, well, that's not really going to change anything. Why would you be worried about changing a heart of a person? Like that doesn't affect what's happened. But I think it's important to still take the ground as a Christian of like, and there could be pushback on this, but like you at least minimum can do what is within your circle and within your power to do. And I guess that's why the question is still like Dietrich Bonhoeffer, if he had been like, well, I'll just talk to the people I know personally and, you know, if I can just change their hearts. But he went and did more than that, a lot more than that. And so I guess that's where I have like a back and forth in my head of those two different issues.
So I wonder if we're talking about different things now. So, because we all agree, go after people's hearts, introduce them to the Father. Absolutely, amen. What do I do when my little town and my county is literally being overrun by foreign invaders that want to kill me and my family? Because if the answer is pray for them, okay, let's build that foundation and go from there. But if there's something different, I think that's where we're getting to more of the meat of the question. What do I do when there's practical things that are physically affecting me? How do I physically respond, if at all?
I think the knee-jerk reaction can either be fear or aggression. That's the knee-jerk reaction. And I think both of them can be foolish and wise at the same time, and so therefore it's kind of a muted thing. I think when Jesus sat and calculated and made a whip before he went into the temple, shows he did not respond out of just emotion. He thought through what he was going to go do. He thought through the outcomes of what he was going to go do. He thought through the effects of what he was going to do, and he resolved, regardless, I'm now going to act. Again, we have to own the responsibility that even if you do something good, if it turns out wrong, you still own it. You have to be able to say, I would have done it again. You have to be able to walk away and not shift frustration on outcomes. because you did what was right, period. That's where you have to come to that resolve. And most people don't want that. We want the action and we want something good to happen. And then we either want to be praised, supported, or if something bad, we want them to be punished. You have to accept that. There's that movie Q with Denzel Washington. His son needs a heart transplant. I can't remember all the details why he couldn't get it, but something was holding it up. And his son's going to die without the heart transplant. But then this guy that doesn't even deserve it, he bribed or something happened that he got it before his son could get it. So Denzel basically goes in to steal the heart. Now, his son ends up getting a transplant. Denzel gets arrested and is going to go to jail. But he calculated what was going to happen to him. And he was willing to risk all that for the sake of his son. I think you have to weigh those things out. Is it right or wrong? Was he noble or not noble? You have to just own it. I think that's what makes it a great story, because we don't know how to resolve the outcome. You can't say this is okay, because everyone will think they're more justified than the next person, because the guy who got it, I forgot how he got it. I think he paid more or something. He was able to kind of move his way up. He was thinking he was more valuable. See, we always have a justification for every action, but you just have to be willing to hit the outcome. And it says in this parable of Luke 14:31-32, what king going out to encounter another king in war will not sit down first and deliberate whether he is able with 10,000 to meet him who comes against him with 20,000? And if not, while the other is yet a great way off, he sends a delegation and asks for terms of peace. His context of that is not looking for peace. It's like you have to take into account, what do you have willing to sacrifice? If I do this act and I lose my whole family as a result of this act, am I okay with that? These are things we don't weigh out. And so we don't operate from emotion. We don't operate from your feelings, but you do need to be prepared and strengthened to act. So cowardice isn't your response to a situation.
And I think maybe you just glossed over, you might have missed verse 33. So you cannot become my disciple without giving up everything you own. After you've counted the cost, then you have to be willing to give up everything that you have for that. That's the counting of the cost.
Which begs the question, how many things do we want to righteously get involved with, but we don't really want it to cost us anything? My question is, those that say, I'm doing this in the name of God, have you actually counted and given your life to the name of God? Or do you live like a Christian cultured life, trying to do aspects of things in the name of God? And now we have a hypocrisy. And the Bible says that in James that the wisdom from man is filled with hypocrisy. You go and act this way, but there's 9 things that show your own hypocrisy in your actions. This is when we get into just fleshly wisdom. And James walks through, there's envy, there's strife, there's all this other stuff is meddling in our quote unquote wisdom. You have to remove all that and you walk in the love of God, that he loves, that he cares about these people. You know, he said to destroy everyone in Jericho, correct? Everyone, when they went into the promised land, the first thing, you destroy every living thing inside of Jericho. Take nothing, you destroy it all. Right? That's God. Why did he have them do that? Because he gave them in Genesis to deal with their unrighteousness. But those people would not change their heart for 400 years. Did you know that's why the children of Israel were slaves in Egypt? Is because the unrighteousness of the people in Canaan had not been fulfilled yet. They had not come to the end of themselves. There was still hope. God was still looking for a way to redeem those people, but they would not change. So once then he brings them out. He takes it. He didn't just randomly just kill people for the sake of another people. He loved people. Now, all the walls came down, right? Except There was one wall that didn't come down. Anybody tell me which wall in Jericho did not fall down? Anyone? Bueller? 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 Harlot's wall. Because she believed in God. And God didn't just have mercy on Rahab, but mercy on everyone in her family that came into her house. So anyone in the city that would believe Rahab and come to her home would have been protected. Anyone. Then Rahab gets married by Salmon. Not the fish, the man. And Salmon, amazingly from the tribe of Judah, marries Rahab, and she becomes the lineage of Jesus. A woman in a city that was condemned to be destroyed becomes the great, 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 great grandmother-ish of Jesus. Think about that just for a moment for a God that's always looking just a wrath. He was always, always, always looking for mercy on people throughout the whole Bible. They didn't want it. So think about his wisdom before he went to war. If there was a way for the hearts to change, he would do it. Look at Assyria. Look at Nineveh. You see Jonah going in and has a prophetic word that they're going to convert or die. And he doesn't want to go. Why does Jonah run? We forget that whole part of the story. Why does he run? Why does he go a different direction? I'm not going to Nineveh because he hated Nineveh. And they deserved the wrath. They deserved the destruction. They deserved to be absolutely annihilated from the face of the earth for the way they treated people. They were an evil, 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 destructive empire. And his word would give them a chance to repent. And he knew that God would have mercy on him if they repented. And he didn't want God to have mercy on him. So this nature of God is throughout the whole Old Testament. He was always looking to provide mercy. He was always looking to deliver. He was always looking to find the love. But people didn't want it. So the problem with the Old Testament isn't God. It was people. Comes to the New Testament, offers the same thing. We get it more hands-on. So you got to think when we go to war, when we go to try to justify actions or we want revenge, God doesn't think that way. He never has. But there is a vengeance. Because of his love for us and the love for those who accept him, there has to be a wrath on the other side. So yes, he comes with his coat dipped in blood and a sword coming out of his mouth, and he comes to bring judgment and declare war on the nations. It's not because he's just, I'm going to get even. He's given everyone a chance. But there hits a point because of those that love him and whom he loves, righteousness has to prevail. So there is a justice and a wrath. Otherwise, there is no love. So we see this playing out through the whole Bible. So let me bring you back all the way back to where we should act in. If our motives is just to push our idea or to want our justice or to want our actions fulfilled without understanding a deeper implications of the love in the heart of people, we will always do it wrong. But when you act, you have to consider the cost and be willing to accept that. But if you do it in advance with Jesus, you will never have to worry about being a coward because you've already given it up anyway. When you should act, we should always be at war. We should always be prepared for war, with a heart to fight out of love for the person next to us. Now get some wisdom. You'll know what to do.
I know there are 17 different trails we could go down with this, but for the sake of time on this episode, any other final thoughts, you guys?
I think personally it answered a lot of my questions that we spent 2 hours on before this and an hour into this. And I think it's something really worth talking about because I think everybody's a little nervous to talk about it because you do have to talk about violence. And so I think it's definitely a conversation to be had, and I really appreciate it.
I'll just leave it at this, is there is violence, but it wasn't because that was something God wanted. It was what the people chose because they defied their identity of what God actually created them to be. When it talks about hell and the weeping of gnashing of teeth, for those of you who don't believe in hell, Jesus mentioned it so many times. But anyway, I'll let you go figure that out. There's weeping and gnashing of teeth. When you weep and gnash your teeth, it's not because you mourn because you miss out on something. You gnash at your teeth only because you are bitter and full of anger. So hell is filled with people that still hate God, still hate who he is, and still hate what he wants to be and what he wants to do in us. It wasn't God rejecting them. It was their absolution of rejection of God. That's the reality. And for the sake of those who love him, God has to protect us from that.
And I'll leave you guys with this. This is something that's helped me over the years. When there's especially intense things going on in my mind, one of the first things I try to pray is, God, help me to know what I should be feeling about this. Because I don't always assume that my initial feelings on a subject are correct 100% of the time. Maybe 99%, but not always. So I always try to recenter and think like, God, if I'm overly angry at this more than I should be, help me to realize that. If I'm not angry enough at this than I should be, help me to realize that and feel the right things and do the right things. Another thing that helps is find some people to talk to about this stuff. If you don't have anybody around you that you can, reach out to us. We have a lot of time on our hands. We appreciate you guys. Till next time, keep the faith, stay in the fight.